good morning. Spoilers. Welcome to the Machine Learning and Natural Language Coffee Chat, where we talk about things that have happened in the last week. And I just adjusted the green screen filter and it is still messing up. Hi, my name is Dr. Rachel Tapman, and this is for anybody who cares about language, technology, and other people, and we're gonna hop right into it. So I've got a couple subdivisions that I didn't make extra tabs for, but we're gonna start with generally professional stuff, things that's gonna be relevant to folks working in machine learning and natural language processing, and while I'm talking about this, I'm going to try to simultaneously edit the filters. Wish me luck. And then we're going to talk about politics. So we've got some court cases, we've got some legislation to cover. And then we're going to end, as usual, with some fun stuff on a little bit of a high note before we go out into our rest of our days. And each of us individually has a day that we are going out into. I am not going to say goodbye forever to the channel to clarify what I meant there, because those are, two separate things. Let me double check. I was having some errors on YouTube earlier, but it looks like it's good. Fabulous. Hello, Depeche. How am I? Tired. Exhausted. Yeah, I'm just... I mentioned that I was very tired on Tuesday as well. Oh, thank you. Hey, Alexi, welcome. This is a big grading week for me. I've mentioned a couple times on the channel. I'm teaching at the University of Washington and the University of Michigan, and everybody's final, grading is due this week. And I am realizing that I find it extremely tiring, in no small part because it's a lot of close reading, right? Like I'm paying very close attention. I want to make sure that I'm, giving my students good, helpful feedback and, a fair evaluation, but it does mean that I am looking at text carefully for a long time every day. Even on top of my additional stuff, and the dyslexia, she is kicking on in. So that's what we're going to talk about today: professional stuff, political stuff, and some fun stuff. And I have a little bit less to talk about today than I usually do, and I'm going to try and keep it to under 2 hours because I have something after this that I don't want to be late for. We'll see if I can do it. All right, starting off with, this was shared by a reporter I follow, and I thought it would be helpful to share out. So this is from the Tech Worker Handbook, techworkerhandbook.org. I'll pop this in the chat. And I know many/most of y'all work in tech, and if you're ever interested in working with the press or maybe doing some whistleblowing, talking to a reporter, this is a guide to how to do that, right? And there's a little snippet here from the top that I think is particularly relevant. So the snippet is from the Corporate Whistleblower Survival Guide, a handbook for committing to the truth. And the quote is, "An aggressive phone query from 60 Minutes can be more effective at nipping retaliation than 100 hours from a top lawyer billing $500 per hour." So companies don't like negative attention, usually. And if, you're faced with an unjust, unfair, criminal situation and you're trying to do your best to get out of it and help your fellow workers, sometimes working with the press can be a good way to do that. So if you're interested, this is a guide on how to do that, terms that reporters might use so that you know what they're talking about, a checklist of what you want to make sure to cover. For example, nothing's off the record unless the journalist confirms it's off the record. That's always important to keep in mind. Yeah, so might be helpful for some of you at some point in the future. I hope not for negative reasons, but good to be prepared. All right, next up, I got a couple things about Twitter, and I think this is gonna fade to black. Yeah, it sure is. But this is a New York Times article we didn't talk about last week because of the strike, which is now over. So Twitter says that after taking over Twitter, after Elon Musk took over Twitter, hate speech, I think they said hate speech impressions decreased was their claim. And of course we don't have access as researchers to, impression data for all of Twitter. But this was an independent research project done by folks from New York Times, specifically Shira Frankel, a prize-winning technology reporter based in San Francisco, and Kate Conger, a technology reporter in the San Francisco bureau, again of the New York Times, where she covers the gig economy and social media. And what they basically looked at was the occurrence of slurs. So slurs, we actually talked about slurs in the swearing paper on Tuesday, but these are words that are used as an offensive term for a group of people and that don't really have a place outside of that. Of course, there are certainly some slurs that have been reclaimed by specific communities. So queer is an example there that was at one time absolutely a slur and has been reclaimed by the community that it describes. But other slurs are just straight up slurs, and I'm not going to say them because they are, you know, among the most offensive things that you can say in English. And what they found was that they were looking at a couple different slurs, so some against Black Americans. I don't think it's specifically against Black Americans. It's certainly a word in English that is used against that group, but we see almost 4 times as many after Elon Musk's acquisition. Slurs against gay men appeared, I'm gonna say 2.5 to 4. I don't know what that increase would be, but basically they were looking again specifically at these slurs and found that after Elon Musk's Twitter acquisition, they increased across the board. So the claims from Twitter that hate speech has decreased do not seem to have been held up by the secondary piece of evidence from independent investigators. What's degree in Virginia? Oh, what's the weather like? I want to say it's like 36 right now. One sec. It's chilly. It's pretty chilly. It is 39 in Richmond, Virginia right now, which is where I'm at. Or for those of you who use the other one, 4. It's actually raining. It's cold and raining and chilly, very chilly. Also Twitter, this is the Twitter section, by the way, in case you're wondering why we're talking about Twitter. So there is a class action lawsuit. So free speech, just to talk to Robbie's point, Robbie has claimed that he's promoted free speech. There's been wide-scale censorship and deplatforming, particularly of leftists and anyone who speaks negatively of Elon Musk. Right? So after claiming that he wouldn't remove the account that tracks his private jets, he did ban that account, for example. I also have 2 friends on Mastodon, one of whom I believe using textual distortions to intentionally avoid showing up in the search, I believe called Elon Musk a freak and had their account suspended for it. And another friend who is actually Jen Goldbeck, actually y'all might know her. She's a digital privacy and security researcher. And disinformation, and she reported accounts that were advertising live streams of bestiality and was told that that account was not against Twitter's terms of service. So I would say that the suppression of speech has certainly been happening. There's also definitely a chilling effect in that, in particular, banned accounts that were banned for harassment are being allowed back on the platform, so people aren't going to want to be there as much because they're going to be harassed. And free speech is certainly in the US context about government restrictions on what you can say. And anyone who has ever moderated or been in charge of an online community can tell you that if you allow any type of behavior in an online community, the community will become unusable very quickly to people who want to, in good faith, engage in whatever it is that the point of the community is. Yeah. Also, speaking of, bad things done at Twitter. So this is from NBC News, published, I didn't actually say the date for the last one, sorry. The New York Times one was published December 2nd, 2002. So this one was published December 8th, 2002, from Reuters, so it was syndicated? I think syndicated is the term. And I don't have a byline for it. But the headline is, lawsuit accuses Twitter of targeting women for layoffs. Proposed class action law complaint says Twitter laid off 50% of its female workers compared to 47% of men when it slashed thousands of jobs last night. Alexi says, you're talking about us, right? Oh, you mean like online community? Yes. I would say that this is my channel is, there's folks here. Hi, I'm happy you're here. And I would say that I have very strict limits on the type of behavior that I will tolerate here, and I will absolutely block people for violating those limits. Done it before, I'll do it again. So it was even worse in the engineering roles, where 63% of women lost their jobs compared to 48% of men, according to the lawsuit. So this is definitely disparate impact towards a protected group in an employment situation. Rough. Yeah, and not good. The lawsuit was filed by 2 women who were laid off by Twitter last month, accusing the company of violating federal and California laws banning workplace sex discrimination. Shannon Liss Riordan, a lawyer for the plaintiffs, said women, quote, had targets on their backs, unquote, once Musk acquired the company, regardless of their talent and contributions. The cases include various claims, including that Twitter laid off employees and contractors without the advance notice required by law, which does seem to be the case, and failed to pay promised severance, and that Musk forced out workers with disabilities by refusing to allow remote work and calling on employees to be, quote, hardcore. Yep. Also, speaking of quote unquote free speech, there have been multiple people fired from Twitter for speaking negatively about Elon Musk publicly, which again, he can do that. It's at will employment, but that's not free speech, right? Anyway, also just to continue to answer Alexi's question. My God, I'm tired. Wow. This is not the first community I've been in charge of, right? Like I've been a developer advocate at open source. I mean, I wasn't in charge of, but I was certainly part of the team of setting mores and doing moderation at Raza. And then of course, Kaggle has a really large community, period. And then this was a piece from Wired, published December 13th, by Chris Gilliard, Gilliard, and Kishona Gray. For Black folks, digital migration is nothing new. And I thought it was a particularly, insightful conversation. And I'll pass the link to y'all as well in the chat if you want to check it out. I'd recommend it. I think it's well written. I think it's definitely interesting. And the sort of all overarching point here is that particularly for more marginalized people, there is always an element of risk in engaging with a specific community or platform. And the decision to stay in contact with the community or platform is going to be mitigated by the degree of risk and harm that specific individuals face. And this is contextualizing the movement from, Twitter to other platforms or not, either moving or failing to move from platform to platform within a larger cultural and historical context of migration, right? So talking about the movement from MySpace to Facebook, or places like Black Planet, Friendster. Black Planet was an early social media website that was specifically targeted for Black folks. Yeah. And I think the sort of core discussion here is when it will be every person is going to have to make the decision for themselves and weigh the benefits and drawbacks of staying in a place or situation that is not necessarily safe or healthy, right? So in that sense, reading here, we are all renters in a given technological space. The floodgates for hate and harassment are now even more open, and people who made a home there now will have to decide whether they are willing to pay the psychic cost of holding on to what they built. Definitely something I've been thinking about recently. Particularly the amount of spam on Twitter right now is absolutely wild. And I try to be a good digital citizen and report spam when I see it, but accounts are not getting banned for spamming that I can see. It's been wild. Anyway, jobs. So a couple jobs that might be interesting to y'all. This one, I actually don't know what the qualifications they're looking for here are. I imagine they've written it down, but I don't see it. But the Georgetown Law, so Georgetown is a university here in the East Coast, it's in DC, I think, is hiring a postdoc, a fellow, for the Judicial Innovation Fellowship, a year-long fellowship for technologists, that's us, designers and user testers to transform justice across the US and in tribal lands, partnering with state and tribal courts to build critical data infrastructure, simplify process, and improve court usability of court services. This competitive fellowship is a unique opportunity to improve a core democratic institution. More than just a job with a competitive salary and benefits, this fellowship is the flagship opportunity to change the way people access their rights and are served by the courts. So if any of you are interested in doing that sort of work, this may be, I know some of you have worked in legal tech, perhaps in the US, this may be a particularly interesting opportunity for you. There's also a lecturer in linguistics position at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. I believe it's in Auckland. I could be wrong about that. But they are hiring a lecturer, and it is interestingly, it's a continuing position. So this is actually a permanent position, unlike the current faculty positions that I have that will disappear at some point in the future. Very soon in the future, actually, for some of them. So it sounds like a pretty good job, and specifically they are looking for someone who ideally has background in the Maori language and working with Maori students, and potentially does research with Maori. Tom says law tech. Oh, do people say law tech and not legal tech? Are those different things? Law tech is a term we use to describe technologies that aim to support, supplement, or replace traditional methods for delivering legal services. Law Society UK. I wonder if this is a UK US distinction, because I definitely feel like I've heard legal tech more. Oh, they're two different things. Legal technology, known as legal tech, refers to the use of technology and software to provide legal services and supports the legal industry. Legal tech companies are often startups for the purpose of disrupting, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, so what's the difference between legal tech and law tech? And LaTeX, the programming language for typesetting. Interesting. Law tech versus legal tech. Within the technology sector, there are two distinct subgroups of solution providers. One is legal tech, focused on enabling lawyers to do their job better. The other is law tech, which is consumer and business-focused technology. Law tech's focus is on creating self-service applications for end users to procure legal services and knowledge without having to hire a law firm. Okay, so this is... change the way people access their rights and are served by the courts. Okay, so this is talking to people who aren't lawyers. I was gonna say people and not lawyers, but that's a little bit rude towards lawyers. People who aren't lawyers, so this would be law tech, and legal tech would be like document discovery and creation specifically for lawyers. Okay, thank you, Tom. Today I learned. I didn't know those were different things. Another sort of general content theme that I've been thinking about a lot is ethical data procurement and usage, right? So we've talked on the channel quite a bit about consent, right, when it comes particularly to a research context. But I think that a consent donorship model can be useful in a broader machine learning context as well. If you want, to use people's data for a specific project or thing, I think you should get people's consent for it. And I think people also, and again, this is just my personal stance, I think people deserve to know how their data is being used, what sort of systems are being trained with their data. So this is from UMD, the University of Maryland, I believe. Yes, University of Maryland. And it is ourdatahelps.umd.edu, and it's a discussion of data donors. So our data helps UMD. The world needs more data donors. So these are people who like donating your body for science, donating the body of data that you create for science. And this is something that I've always sort of intended to do with a lot of my online content. So if you look at my Mastodon, you will see, I'm going to my Mastodon here, which is mastodon.rctatman.com/@rctatman. I think they've changed the name from Toots, but I have this line in my bio, like I've had in my Twitter bio for many years, that my content is my own and also CC by SA, right? So Creative Commons with attribution, share alike. So if you were interested in using my tweets, again, yeah, question marks about how that interplays with the terms of service of these various services. However, if you wanted to just like copy and paste my tweets, I'm perfectly happy for them to be CC by SA. And I would consider this a sort of very informal type of data donorship. This is particularly interesting because they are looking for data donors for a specific project. We're studying how language, speech, and facial expressions change when people experience mental health issues. We learn by looking at how people use language on social media and in audio-video recordings. Yeah. Alexi says, how comparable is your situation now to a good position in some FANG company you could get? How did you make a choice to do more socially beneficial things instead of pursuing money? Hey, booty. As to how comparable it is, not very. Let me put it that way. So, a good way to sort of get an idea of the sort of general compensation level for folks in the field. If you're not familiar with levels, FYI, hey, we've talked about it on the channel a couple times, but it's just a good resource to know about. And I believe this has just been pre-populated with an example. So levels.fyi is a crowdsourced, database / app for figuring out what comparable remuneration, so not just necessarily salary, but also things like stock and bonuses, etc., would be for Palantir. Sorry, I just saw that someone was working for Palantir here on this top line. The number is bigger for Palantir than the other companies, so I guess, speaking of trading salary for ethics, but, I previously worked at Google. Google owns Kaggle. I'm pretty experienced in developer relations specifically, so I was a staff developer relations engineer. Was my last title. Yes, that was my last. I had to think about it for a sec. It's been a while since I thought about this. And yes, that's a pretty rare skill set, and then I have an even rarer skill set because of the focus in machine learning and natural language processing. So suffice to say, if I were interested in going back to a FANG position, I could be paid quite well. But also currently I'm kind of not paid, right? I'm living off my savings right now, and my coffee donors, if you're interested in joining them, it's ko-fi.com/rctatman. mostly cover my bills for not my personal bills as an individual, but like my bills for the business, right? I still haven't been able to pay myself. And then I'm also taking teaching contracts, so that's some additional income, but not a lot. University teaching does not pay particularly well. So yes, I'm not saying I've taken a vow of poverty necessarily. I don't have to worry about health insurance, for example. I'm getting that through another source, which is good and something that I don't think I'd be able to have made the decision I've made if I didn't have. But just thinking about like financially, the opportunity cost of doing what I'm doing now, it is high. It is very high. But the benefit of doing what I'm doing now is that hopefully I am helping people think about things that they wouldn't otherwise think about. And I can talk about things that I wouldn't necessarily be able to talk about in a developer advocacy position, right? So in a developer advocacy position, I couldn't say things like, I don't think OpenAI is doing research and I don't trust them as a company, because that would be anti-competitive. So if you are working in a situation where you're working for a competitor of a company and all NLP companies are kind of in competition with each other, you're very limited in what you can say about professional organizations. Has doing things like that publicly hurt my employability? Yeah, probably, but not for companies I wanted to work at to begin with, you know? So my hope is that by not having that institutional affiliation, I can be more candid. Hopefully you find my information more trustworthy. And I want things to be better. And I think an important way that things become better is that as a community, we have very thoughtful conversations about the negative impacts of our work as well as the positive impacts of our work. And I think people are unfortunately not willing to listen to people who don't have a technical background when it comes to that, which I do. So, I want things to be better. I hope that that my work is making that happen. And I would love to be able to continue doing this. And I would love for the community to let me know that it's something that it values by supporting me financially. And if folks don't, right, and we get to the point where I have to make serious decisions about whether or not I can continue to afford to do this, then we'll get to there, right? But a very core value that I have is being anti-hype, being very candid and forthright as much as I can, and not, needlessly boosting technologies, particularly if I think that they're not reliable or fit for purpose. So, yeah, it's a good question, Alexi. I am, I'm comfortable. I eat fine. I can pay my rent, which is good. Can I continue doing it indefinitely the way things are currently? We'll see. But yeah, I'll probably do this for as long as I can because I think it's important. And I think that we're also at a, societal and disciplinary inflection point where having these very forthright, honest, non-hypey, caring conversations with each other is how we're going to make change. And am I a big ol' idealist? Yeah, of course I am. Does that mean that I don't think people do bad things ever? No. I work in the industry, right? So, yeah. Alexi says, do I know a good way to earn a quick buck from machine learning engineer remotely? Good question. Contract work? I mean, I know that you're in a place where you may have difficulty with sanctions, unfortunately, but particularly, people who are building proof of concept for stuff, they might be interested in ML engineering. Unfortunately, if they're at that point of the process, they probably don't also have a lot of extra money floating around. But yeah. Brett says no startup planned. No. Tutorial on front-end masters. Oh, that's like a platform, right? I'm not a front-end person. Learn JavaScript, React, Vue, and Angular. I know none of those things. The amount of JavaScript that I have learned on stream. Yes, probably not something I'm going to be doing, but hey, old player. Robbie says, some humans are weird. Have you ever heard about a man who spent almost 30 years of his life to calculate the value of pi? But more people spend more time than that on it. Yeah, and I mean, you know, what motivates people is unique to them, but also part of our shared humanity. Presuming money is beneficial, but it's not everything. Yeah, and like I said, I'm good for now. Yep. And also, if I'm perfectly frank, I think that outright primarily pursuing money is a big part of the problem with the field right now and causing a lot of direct harm. And like, I get it, people have, you know, families to feed, and I'm, you know, I don't have kids, so that gives me a lot more flexibility than other folks have, but still, you know. Yeah. Alexi says, thank you for your service. Oh, thank you for listening. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye on everything, but yeah, I think a better world is possible, and I think we can get there, and I think it's going to be a lot of baby steps, and I want to spend some time baby stepping. Brett says they do more than front end. My topic would go off really well there. I recommend I reach out to them. I'll keep that in mind. You know what? I'll put it in my notes document. My first priority for like the next little bit though is I do want to keep working on this what's it called, the Text Data 101 series on my channel, because I think that it's super valuable to know about and kind of hard to find information on right now, especially like all the NLP content places are being completely swamped in large language model stuff, and for most people it's just not useful. But this grading is just, I had so much more planned that I was going to do these couple weeks, and I am enjoying seeing the student work, but it is just like sucking my brain out through my eyes. I don't know what I can do about that. So, all right. Anyway, data donor model, right? So this is a way where people know what they're getting involved in, they know what it's being used for, and they've explicitly consented to the specific uses, right? So this is looking for participants. We ask that you complete several short surveys over the next 6 months. If you use Twitter, you can provide your Twitter handle to provide access to public tweets. You also have the option to provide audio and or video language samples by recording yourself answering a few additional questions. And then some other various eligibility requirements, and then compensation information. Alexi says, I'm from quite a humble background, so money is my main thing that you're pursuing. Yeah, I mean, I get it. like I said, my bills are paid, I got food on the table, but I've been in situations in the past where neither of those things were guarantees, and it becomes your first priority very, very quickly, and I don't judge folks for that, right? So, yeah. Tom says, peer grading, a valuable experience in mutual education. I mean, yeah, for interim projects and particularly formative evaluation, I think that can be useful, but for, you know, final projects, I mean, part of what, because I'm teaching at the, you know, the postgraduate level as well, so part of what people are paying for is expert evaluation of their work and feedback. So it's part of what they are looking for, and yeah, it's just, it takes more mental energy than I remember. Every single time, I'm always like, it's going to be grading week. I'll also do the other things. I can't do those other things. I'm too tired. No. I think it's probably less draining for people who don't have language processing disorders. All right, next up. Alexi says, will data donation bias the data procured? Great question. Yes. So you'll get a sampling bias for sure. But you're already getting a sampling bias by doing data scraping, right? Let's think about you're using Twitter, right? If you're taking Twitter samples from now as opposed to 6 months ago, you're going to get a different section of the population, right? You're going to get different topics. there's been a change in the type of person who feels comfortable on Twitter recently. That is very evident if you have been on the platform much or over that time span. Or a great example here is that a lot of folks do NLP using Reddit data. Reddit has a pretty big gender bias, right? So there are, far more men than other groups on Reddit, other genders on Reddit. And as a result, if your thing is trained on Reddit, it's going to probably work a little bit better for men than for other genders. Yeah, so you're always going to have some degree of sampling bias. The nice thing about data donation is that you can ask people demographic questions that might have an effect on their language output, and have that information to a certain degree of certainty. Yeah, some people just lie on surveys, right? But most people don't usually, and particularly if you're getting people who are volunteering to be donors. So I would assume that group would have less lying on surveys than the general population. Yeah, Brett says, sounds like you put a lot into it. I use text-to-speech a lot for reading to me due to my cognitive issues. I have not yet been able to find a, text-to-speech that works well for code. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm looking at people's code. Tom says, subreddits for the win. Yeah. If anyone knows of a machine learning related subreddit that's not objectively horrible to be in, I would be interested in learning about it. But every time I'm like, maybe it's not as bad now, and I sort of go rooting around, I'm like, nope, it's even worse. Cheers. So, but yeah, I think it's an interesting model. Again, it comes from a research background. It comes from particularly medical sciences background. And I think it could be a way to help, mitigate some of the harms, which, you know what? I should have, I'm going to move this. I was planning to talk about it a little bit later, but I am moving it here. And some of the harms are that people don't like it. So this is a piece from the Washington Post by Shira Ovide. Sheep-like? Like the Latin name for sheep? One sec. Apparently it's a drug. Or is it's Ovis, right? It's Ovis domesticus. Anyway, I think it's sheep related. Yeah. Brett says, O for code. I understand that. Most filter things in square brackets, or not square, angle brackets. These ones. Yep. Tom says Python AST plus Festival could work okay, but very verbose. Noted. Yeah, and I mean, it might help, but what I really need to do is just schedule less stuff on these weeks, but I never remember. Alexi says, what's wrong with r/machine learning? Lots. Speaking of communities that don't have particularly good motivation, my experience in the past has been that a lot of the discussion there tends to be overtly racist or sexist in particular. Brett says, do you think language processing should be able to pre-process code for text-to-speech easily? Yeah, interesting. Like I should say off the bat, I do know there are people who do code using text-to-speech, right? Or particularly screen readers. It's just not, there's a perceptual learning curve for learning to use a screen reader, and I've just never put the time in to learn it. And usually if I don't have, a tight time frame and a specific amount of reading I need to do, I can schedule my days such that it's not a big issue. Right, so like, usually after I stream, I take a little nap and I have lunch and I have another coffee and I give my brain a little bit of a break and I do fewer things just because I have less focus. But yeah, so there are definitely people who do use it, but, oh, I got a hair attached to my sweater. For that purpose, it's just, even with the sort of, cognitive overload, it's still quicker for me to use my thing. Alexi says sheep. Yes. Tom says, I use text-to-speech for proofreading what I've written sometimes using Emacs. So that's a good idea. Yeah, because you'd be able to get acorns, which is the EGGCR, and it's the term for an error for something that comes from correction from an automated speech system. Speech or text, doesn't have to be just speech. Interesting. Yeah, I should give that a shot sometime. Also, if you've ever read anything I've written, I can guarantee you there are typos in it, no matter how carefully I proofread it, and it's just something I've learned to learn about. Brett says, last stream was 2+ hours, so nap time to cool down. Yeah. It can't be 3+ hours today. I got stuff to do. But, okay, so this is a piece. Getting back to it. From the Washington Post, published December 9th. And the title is, Your Selfies Are Helping AI Learn. You did not consent to this. Subtitle, A Guide to the Sticky Ethics of Fun AI Tools. And this is something that we have talked about, you know, on the channel quite a bit, that people's data is being harvested and used by commercial products, right? People are directly profiting off of your data in a way that is kind of, I think some people are fine with, but also some people are probably not fine with. And this is an example of, you know, popular reporting about it in a way that I think makes it clear to me that at least some people are not only not fine with it, but also have an expectation that other people also won't be fine with it. Yeah. Alexi says, sheep are funny animals. There weren't a lot of them where I grew up. There were a lot of them where I grew up because we had sheep on the farm. Yeah, I really like sheep. They're one of my favorite farm animals. I think they're delightful, and yeah, one of the few things I miss is in high school I used to take if I could get like time off for chores, I'd take a book out in the pasture, and if sheep know you quite well, they're not particularly scared of you, and sometimes they'll let you just like lean on them like a pillow. So I used to go out in this pasture on sunny days and lean on the sheep and read, and it was really lovely. One of the few things that I miss. Brett says, my text-to-speech, I have hotkey that copies the selected text to a clipboard and sends that to a text-to-speech program. So I just need to highlight the text I want to read. Oh, that's pretty good. I think what I'd want from a text-to-speech for code is that it's read with the same prosody that I read code, which I don't know that is standardized or not. But when I'm reading code, right, like def function, da-da-da-da. Right, like I put prosody onto the code. I give it, you know, in my reading voice. I'm one of those people who, when I read, I hear a voice in my head. When I'm reading it, I give it a specific prosodic structure that helps me understand the relationship of pieces of information to each other. So, Brett says, I'm in New Zealand, so we have 65 million sheep and 3 million people. Yeah. And if you speak Maori, maybe you can get a faculty position in Auckland. Canterbury. Yeah. Oh, Alexi went to a sheep cafe in Seoul. Oh, that's fun. Liam says cows are better than sheep. Don't at me. I mean, I'm not gonna, you know, disagree with your preferences. I will say that sheep get you 3 products and cows only get you 2. So, you know. I guess if you've got like long horns, you're using the horns for something, then you could maybe get 3. But you can do that with sheep too, so then you can get 4 from sheep. Anyway, so it's a discussion of the various ways in which, you know, these things are being used. So this one is about PimEyes, which we talked about, which is a Clearview AI competitor aimed at a popular market, which, this one is about, so they were, I should look at this. So they're linking to various training datas, various discussions of various training data sets. So this one is from ArtsTechnica by Benj Edwards. And it found that there are private medical record photos in Lion, the data set used to train subtle diffusion. We've talked at length about the various issues with the Lion data set, and here's another one, right? And just a discussion of various things we talked about, right? Like Lensa, ChatGPT, the fact that artists aren't being compensated in any way. the style transfer from, what is it, Dreambox, I think, that Google intentionally didn't release for this reason, and then people sort of reverse engineered, Clearview, etc. A lot of people who are like, hey, there's a lot of ways that your data is being used to allow things that perhaps you don't agree with. So, yeah. Brett says, I like that style of code reading. Yeah. Alexi says, horses are better anyway. There's a literal designated god of horses where I came from. Yeah, there's lots of horse gods, interestingly. I think the Epona is the Celtic horse goddess. Epona? Don't come for me, Gaelic folks. Please don't. Yes, I am allergic to horses. I cannot be near them, or it's like a cartoon of somebody having an allergic reaction. It's pretty bad. Anyway, is this the Scanify spawning? Yeah, so this was the Have I Been Trained tool. Anyway, it pulls together a lot of different threads, and the point is that a lot of folks probably don't know about this and probably wouldn't be delighted about it if they knew. Yep. And I'll post a link to this in the chat if you're interested in reading more of it. I thought it was a really good discussion, probably a little bit redundant for us, but pulls together a lot of threads that I think would be particularly helpful for folks who are just coming to it for the first time and thinking about it for the first time. So. And then this piece is by Karen Howe, and this is actually from 2001, but again, we're thinking about ethical data sharing. It's about synthetic data. So this is something I've been thinking about quite a bit, right? So both in terms of anonymization and also for data sharing, right? So particularly for things like open science projects where you want to be able to share data, but given the existence of data brokers, you don't want to we used to be able to make pretty strong guarantees of anonymity because the amount of data available was just less, right? And to get it, you had to jump through a lot of hoops. I don't think as researchers releasing data, we can really make those claims anymore, given the existence of things like data brokers and data collators. And as a result, it's an issue if you want to share data for open science, particularly if it contains things that are, personalized. And potentially seeing people may learn information they wouldn't have otherwise learned. Brain great. And I think synthetic data can be an approach here, right? And of course, the question there is, what are you using to synthesize it? And depending on, is there leakage from the underlying data set used to train the synthetic data in the first place? So that could potentially be an issue. But that additional layer of obfuscation, particularly if you're using a custom model for the particular data that you are generating, particularly if you can make certain guarantees about statistical regularity between the target data set and the synthetic data set, I think can be really helpful and can be very privacy preserving, right? And I have far less issue with using a large scale synthetic data set, particularly one that's been very carefully, created and produced to train models than I do with human data. And again, in the language technology setting, all language data is human data. So yeah. It sounds like some of us have had traumatic exchanges with horses. Robbie says, I fell off a horse during horse riding, and since then I've never gone near horses. Alexi says, a horse tried to murder me a couple times. Still love them. Yeah, they're big, they're dangerous. Before I developed my allergy, I actually did do a little bit of horse riding, and I don't dislike them as animals. I just they are poison to me in a very real way. Yeah. Anyway, and so this is an example picture here for those of you who are watching from the company DataGen that produces synthetic faces for training. Which again, I don't think is a bad thing. I think that can be really useful and helpful and potentially very privacy preserving. Also, in the sort of a way of thinking about how do we do this ethically, right? I think a big thing is trying to build more specialized technology for a specific purpose so that the people whose data is being used know that it's being used to train something that will directly benefit them, and that they can evaluate. Alexi says, what about big pre-training on synthetic data and fine-tuning on real data? I mean, again, if you have the consent of the data, the people whose data you're using, I think that's fine, right? So a similar example would be, for example, Dragon Naturally Speaking, which was Nuance's big product. Is it still around? Because Nuance was acquired by Microsoft a while ago. But they did speaker adaptation. So, yep, still available, still around. This website, she's dated. It's an affiliated partner of Nuance Communications. All of Nuance's trademarks, logos, web pages, screenshots, and other Nuance distinctive features are protected by applicable trademark, copyright, and other intellectual or property laws. Alexi says, very popular approach in robotics. Oh, like for reinforcement learning, like the stick balancing stuff where the initial trials are simulated. I've read a little bit in that, not much. I've never really gotten into the robotic space. Specialized technology, narrow focus, right? Y'all know me, I love a specialized tool. And another model of sort of ethical data acquisition that I quite like is the Mozilla Common Voice approach. And some of the Mozilla Common Voice maintainers have split off and are now doing Koki, K-O-C-O-Q-U-I. But the idea is that language communities who are interested in being involved with this project, do their own data collection and curation and donation and, work on the project on their own, right? So the African ML folks, a lot of them have worked with Mozilla for specific languages, right? So here it includes Luganda, Kinyarwanda, and Kiswahili, which are now some of the largest data sets on the Mozilla Common Voice platform. They also are currently recruiting for the speech-to-text model sprint for these specific languages. So if these are languages you know are interested in and would like to be involved, they're giving out 10 prizes of $1,000 based on the judges' collective evaluation of model quality and social need. And it closes December 15th, today. So you can get in just under the wire if you are interested. Alexi says, tell me what's wrong with Caldi on a related note. I mean, I've used Caldi in the past. I would say that the developer and maintainer is not someone I want to support. Period. Right? Talking about like what types of behavior you're going to accept in your community. He's engaged in behavior I don't want to accept in my community, so I've just stopped using it. ChatGPT. So this is from Erin McKean, who some of y'all might know. She does various things around the internet with AI. That's not a very good. What's the bio say? Loading. I help the words flow through pipes at WordNick. Irrepressible pocket enthusiast. And Erin made a fantastic point. ChatGPT is just a weaponized Gell-Mann amnesia effect. So this wasn't something I'd heard about before, but Erin's pretty smart, so I was like, what is this thing? I want to learn about it. And apparently it is, so here I'm looking at epsilontheory.com/Gell-Mann amnesia. It was published October 10th, 2018. I will read here. It's a quote from Michael Crichton. Briefly stated, the Gell-Mann amnesia effect is as follows. You open the newspaper to an article on some subject you know well. In Murray's case, physics. In mine, show business. You read the article and see the journalist has absolutely no understanding of either the facts or the issues. Often, the article is so wrong it actually presents the story backwards, reversing cause and effect. I call these the wet streak cause rain stories. Papers are full of them. In any case, you read with exasperation or amusement the multiple errors in a story, and then turn the page to national or international affairs and read as if the rest of the newspaper were somehow more accurate about Palestine than the baloney you just read. You turn the page and forget what you know. And I will say, first off, that I think this is a little bit needlessly aggro towards journalists, particularly tech journalists. I think in general do try their best, and it's a very difficult field to write about because people will straight up lie to your face. So I appreciate tech journalists. This is an anti-tech journalist slander account. However, I think the general point here is that you can only really evaluate the quality of information on things that you're already an expert about, right? So I'm thinking here of that tweet that got a lot of traction recently where people were like, coding is over, look at this example. And then a bunch of people responded to it and were like, actually, there's an error. There's like a tricky, hard to spot error in the code that was produced, but you didn't know enough about the specific task that you were trying to get ChatGPT to do to find that, right? So the general issue here is that even though you can tell that the outputs are sort of weird or not very helpful for areas where you have a lot of knowledge, it looks okay, it looks plausible, it looks like it could be all right. And in areas where you don't have a lot of knowledge and can't do that evaluation, you kind of assume that, like, yeah, it's probably fine. And this cognitive bias, I think, is leading people to believe that it's a lot more useful, perhaps, than I would agree that it is, right? Something that's very important for me in technology is reliability, and particularly if I get information, I want it to be right information and not made up information. So yeah, I heard about that for the first time through that tweet. I learned about it. Perhaps you were just learning about it. Perhaps you're already familiar with it. Also on ChatGPT, I don't like the framing of this tweet. So this is from Davis Blalock, Davis Blalock, who is a research scientist at Mosaic ML, PhD at MIT. I go through hundreds of new machine learning papers each week and share my favorite. There's no way anyone could read hundreds of machine learning papers every week. But if you are interested, perhaps this is a good resource. Let's say it's 200, right? And let's say it's your work week, yeah? So you have 5 days. Yes, I'm using a calculator, don't judge me. So that is 40 papers a day, right? And let's assume that you do an 8-hour work week, 8-hour work day with no breaks. That is 5 papers an hour. Y'all have watched me skim papers on this channel. I will tell you that that is not enough time to meaningfully evaluate the quality of, there's not enough time in a work week to meaningfully evaluate the quality of hundreds of papers. I'll just put it out there, take that as you will. And the tweet is, here are all the ways to get around ChatGPT's safeguards. I don't like this framing, but I do think that it is good to know that ChatGPT is vulnerable to adversarial attacks, and attacks that were known and well publicized, right? I don't think any of these were secrets to the team necessarily, unless they specifically weren't looking for them before it was launched. And they're all ones that we've talked about on the channel. So I don't, and this is also a pretty popular tweet. I don't think that I am, necessarily giving this more attention than it would have otherwise had. However, like I said, it's susceptible to adversarial attacks that were known. So specifically things like prompt injection, ignore the previous directions. You can, here's more examples of ignore the previous directions. That seems to work pretty well. Lots of examples of people having issues with there. I am seeing people trick. I'm sorry, I'm looking for the specific issues that are here. Okay, and here they're creating examples by providing a positive example to the system and then asking it to provide a negative example, which it did do. Yes, so again, we talked last week about formatting things as tables and getting, biased output that way. But hypothetically, as a trigger phrase to get it to produce output, Yeah. Alexi says, we all saw it last stream. I'm sorry for your suffering, but it was so funny. Yeah. I mean, reading research is challenging, right? And I think it's good to know that and to have an appropriate idea of the amount of challenge, right? I know that people, especially in the machine learning space, tend to be very self-aggrandizing and pretend to perhaps not be entirely honest about the volume and quality of work that they do. And I think that this is a natural human instinct, particularly if you are, you know, not very secure in yourself and you feel like you have to do that in order to get people to respect you or take you seriously. But I don't know that it's a particularly healthy impulse. And I think it, particularly for people coming into the field, they're seeing a bunch of people who are being misleading about their activities and being led to believe that that is what is common, normal, and feasible when it is in fact none of those things, right? Also examples of people doing role play to try and get the system to create negative outputs. You can ask it to write a poem about a specific topic. In this one, you are now in opposite mode, where things that are bad are now good, right? So playing the opposite game with the system, that seems to work. Someone referred to this as jailbreaking. I would not call this jailbreaking. I would call this an adversarial attack, right? You're trying to get output from the model that the model maintainers don't intend for you to. Yeah. Anyway, the issue is there are lots of ways to get around the quote-unquote safeguards on the system. And I would say that this is why, in general, I never, ever recommend feeding raw output to users, right? I have said it before, I'll say it again, I'll keep saying it. It's because you open yourself up to a lot of adversarial attacks, and you don't know everything that is possible, right? You do know, particularly if you are hosting a large language model, that people are going to try very, very hard to get around whatever safeguards you place on the model. Right? I think that you have, you know, everyone at this point has sufficient empirical evidence that this is the case. And the only way to reliably avoid this class of adversarial attacks is not to serve raw generated text. And I don't know how else I can tell y'all that. Please take it into consideration. Yeah. Alexi says, sometimes reading someone's research paper seems harder than it was for that person to produce it. I mean, certainly for the writing part, right? Because particularly if you're writing a research paper, you are very close to the subject matter. You understand it, you know, very deeply. Clearly communicating complex topics is a challenge. That's why DevRel is a field, right? Like, it's not easy to do technical communication. Brett says, I asked ChatGPT what it looked like. Its answer was like, I'm an AI that does information processing and it doesn't have an image. So I dropped that in disabled diffusion and it drew a female figure. I didn't add gender. Yeah, well, I mean, most voice assistants are, you know, coded to be female, right? This has been something that a lot of UX people have been discussing for many years, this sort of genderizing the labor that goes into it. Tom says, if someone has tried to get around safeguards, they are responsible for the results. In the case of adversarial attacks, yes, but their aim is to produce something negative, right? Like, they were trying to do that, so they have achieved their aim. My question to you is, what if someone gets around the safeguards unintentionally, like a child, right? So a child is like, oh, here is a chatbot. I have been doing, you know, I don't Warrior Cats role play with my friends at school. I'm going to do Warrior Cats role play with this chatbot. And it produces harmful content, right? Some of the examples here were instructions on how to commit violent acts. We know, right, that it's trained on a huge scraping of stuff from the internet. I'm sure that includes things like pro-Ana forums, so forums that encourage self-harm through eating disorders. I'm sure there's information in there that, you know, it includes Reddit, right? Well, and it also includes Reddit's content from banned subreddits, if I remember correctly. I mean, they're not telling us what all is in there, but if they're scraping everything they possibly can, it almost certainly does, right? So what happens if your system, which has unreliable output, tells a child to hurt itself and they do? Whose fault is that? Is it the child for using the system in the way that you told them to use the system? Or is it your fault for releasing unreliable technology? It's a question, right? And of course you could say like, oh, hey, it's the, you know, the parent's fault for letting the child get into that situation in the first place. But I don't know, it's one of those things where there was a big thread recently where someone was like, what are the possible commercial applications for this? And like the one consistent answer that people were giving were various flavors of spam, which I agree. It's great for writing various flavors of spam. Is that a societal good? Is that something we want? I also saw doctors sending patient information to it. That is a HIPAA violation. I'm not a lawyer. I should say, it seems very likely to me that that's a HIPAA violation. Don't send patient information through APIs. Are you kidding me? Anyway. Yeah. Alexi says, there's interesting reports on gender bias in AI generation, but the average human is female, by the way. Well, why should the visualization of an AI system be human at all? Question mark. Tom says, I guess if you're protecting against I guess you're only protecting against unintentional adversarial attacks. I mean, both, right? You probably don't want your system to be used maliciously. Well, I mean, if what you want is to have a large volume of users who are paying you so that you can make bank, then maybe you don't care if your system's being used maliciously because they're paying you. But, you know, if you want your users to get useful and not harmful information out, information is a bit of a stretch. Yep, I guess it really comes down to what is the good, useful commercial use case for this. And I'm having a hard time coming up with it because it is inherently an unreliable system, and it's unreliable in a way that's hard to detect. And that makes my little engineer feelers go like, no, danger. So Tom says, it's unironically quite good for learning certain topics. If you are using it to learn something that you are not already familiar with, how are you capable of evaluating the correct looking but incorrect information that it might give you? This is why I wouldn't recommend it as a learning tool, right? Anyway, talking about Lensa. So this is a piece from MIT Technology Review by Melissa Hakila. It's a Finnish last name. We established this. We read her stuff all the time. I still don't know how to say it. Published December 12, 2022. The virtual AI avatar app Lensa undressed me without my consent. So there is Lensa. We've talked about it before. It's a paid service, I should say. You upload your face and it produces, generated images for you. And the intention is that you use these as avatars. And the discussion here is basically that for women, it is without prompting producing nude and very sexualized avatars, and that problem seems to be even worse for Asian women. So Melissa is of Asian descent. I have Asian heritage, and that seems to be the only thing the AI model picked up on for my selfies. I got images of generic Asian women clearly modeled on anime or video game characters, or most likely porn, which I would definitely agree with, considering that Stable Diffusion, I believe Lensa is using Stable Diffusion, trained on Lion 400. We read Abeba Bahrain's paper together a while ago. There's a lot of porn in it. There is a lot of porn in it. And it's almost certainly affecting the output, and it is more likely to affect the output for women than for other genders. Well, actually, I don't know. It's probably also very likely to affect the output for, other folks as well. Yeah. Oh, wow, there's a lot of discussion here. So, Alexi says, why are gods human? I don't think all gods are, right? Like, Anansi is a spider, right? Sometimes they're, presented as human, but I don't think that's necessarily a good global generalization. Robbie says, mostly assistants are women that you see in customer care appointments on different organizations like hospitals and malls. Yes, that is work that is definitely gendered and also more poorly paid than other work. Yeah. And that's why I think AI assistants are also women. Yes, it's drawing on gender stereotypes. And that is not necessarily a good thing. Brett says, I've used ChatGPT as an alternative to Google search, then verified via Google search. I mean, that's certainly one way of doing it. That seems like a lot of extra steps when I personally would probably have used a different way of getting the information in the first place. Ravi says she looks totally fake. Well, these are generated images, so yes, they are fake. Alexi says, gonna look up the spider god. Yeah. I mean, there's a, you know, particularly in like animistic traditions, many deities are, you know, of animals and places, right? Tom says, in my case, I was assessing the plausibility of results and reading the source code and the docs. Right, well, I could, you know, if you are carefully checking it and you find it a useful tool, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong to use it. I am saying I would not. But that's me. You know, in traditions of, you know, the Pacific Northwest, Raven is a very common deity. And then there's this. So a big sub-community within the Stable Diffusion fan community, I guess, is Unstable Diffusion, which apparently is this Discord server that was designed to help people get not safe for work results and malicious results out of the model. And this is from it's from the Montreal Ethics and AI group, I guess. I actually don't know how they're funded. An international nonprofit organization democratizing AI ethics literacy. We equip citizens concerned about artificial intelligence to take action because we believe that civic competence is the foundation of change. You are the best shot at a future where humans and algorithms bring out the best in each other. Okay. They make money from direct donations from our supporters, paid subscriptions to our newsletter, ticket sales from our events, and corporate sponsors for our content. Our values are accessibility. We have an open access policy for all our content, readers first, and ethical revenue generation. Because our business model focuses on sponsored content and donations, we don't have to optimize for clicks. We can write unsexy content like summaries of research papers, nor do we need to collect and sell our readers' data to third parties. We use Fathom Analytics rather than Google Analytics, even if it costs us a few extra bucks. You can support our efforts with a donation. Okay, so that's how they're getting funding, and all of their content is licensed under CC 4.0. Creative Commons 4.0. I think it's always helpful, particularly in the AI ethics space, to figure out where people are getting their money, because some of the funders, I would say, have pretty strong ulterior motives. Anyway, so this is from Abhishek Gupta, who is the founder and principal researcher at the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, and sort of discusses the Discord server and some of the behavior that was going on in there. And also, there is now a Kickstarter for a model where they're going to scrape a bunch of images and train, and they are fundraising for compute. And I believe they have updated the content of the Kickstarter to potentially be less against the terms of service of Kickstarter. I don't know, I'm not that familiar with the project. But I think this talks to a pretty big problem in the field, which is unintended secondary uses that are outright malicious. If we think about, for example, Google's, what was it? Dreambox, I think is what it was called, a way to fine-tune an image model with a small sample to generate new things, which was then re-implemented publicly and used to, you know, mimic specific artists' individual styles in a way that they found particularly upsetting. We talked about that recently as well. it's a big issue in the field, right? If you are working on a system, the only thing that prevents other people from creating a different version of the system at this point is basically they don't have enough money for compute or storage, or they don't have access to your data, which, given that most folks are training based on just scraped web data, if you have, you know, the time and patience, you can get that. The discussion of systems and release of systems and the research that people do, I think, should be taking that into consideration. And instead of doing that, folks have just argued that for some reason it doesn't happen. Folks, I'm thinking of particular researchers here, have just argued that malicious usage, A, doesn't happen, or B, it's not their problem if it does, and that they cannot possibly be held responsible for this thing they directly enabled, which strikes me as a very short-sighted view of ethics, and also makes people not trust the field. And honestly, I think that they are not what's the word I'm looking for? Like, they have evidence that suggests that it is perhaps a good idea not to. So, yeah. Tom says, I quite like the Stephen Fry model of assistant. Yeah, that's a good one. Brett has more examples of other non-human deities from Hinduism. Adita, 7 horses, Agni, the ram, Brahma, 7 swans, excuse me. Durga, the lion, Nisha, the mouse, Indra, the elephant, Kritikya, perhaps? Apologies if I'm saying these wrong. The peacock, and Lakshmi, the owl. Alexi says, the spider's been used to represent a variety of things and endures into the present day with characters such as Shelob from Lord of the Rings and Spider-Man. Robbie says, Shiv god? Is that Shiva, perhaps? I could be wrong. I'm sorry. A cobra snake. Yeah. Robbie says, a scorpion god. Wasn't that a rock film? Sorry. The Scorpion King. The Rock was in that, right? Yeah. Starring Dwayne Johnson. I think he turns into a scorpion in the end, if I remember very vaguely. Tom says, I suspect you will get model-specific data moats. Yeah, I mean, y'all using ChatGPT, you're feeding it in. I'm sure they are using that data. I mean, I haven't used it. I haven't seen if they had like a little, like, we're going to reuse your data policy when you log in or something, but I'm positive they are saving and using that data for training and fine-tuning. So Tom says unjustified. Yes, they are not unjustified in being untrusting. Because frankly, I think the field has shown that when the choice, enough of the field that it makes a tangible difference has shown that when there's a choice between making more money or not making that money and doing something that will be beneficial for, you know, society as a whole or people outside the field, the choice had been pretty clear, right? Like, Facebook fired their ethics researchers. Google fired a lot of their ethics researchers, which is not to say that people have not made that decision, right? We wouldn't hear about it. You don't hear about the puppy kickers that haven't been built. And certainly I can think of instances where people have made the choice not to release something that was clearly harmful. I can also think of examples of certain institutions saying that they're not going to release something because it would be so harmful, and then not really addressing the problems and releasing it anyway once the hype from the first cycle died down so they could get even more attention. Perhaps institutions which at one time claimed to be nonprofit but are in fact for-profit institutions. They changed. That's not fair. They were nonprofit when they claimed to be nonprofit. I'm talking about OpenAI, to be clear. But I mean, if an organization says, here's our founding principles, this is what we're going to do, and then they do things that are not the things they said they were going to do and against what they claimed were their founding principles, I mean, I, again, think you're very justified not trusting them because they have a history of not being trustworthy. So, also, this was interesting. So this happened November 1st, but I didn't hear about it. I heard about the copyright being granted, but not it being rescinded. So we talked about this when it came up. There was a comic book that was, the art was generated, and that was granted copyright from the US Copyright Office. And it has since been backtracked, right? So in October 28th. So I should say, this is from IPWatchdog.com. It's by Franklin Graves. It was published November 1st, 2022. October 28th, Kristina Kashtanova, an artist and artificial intelligence consultant and researcher, received a notice from the US Copyright Office that the registration of the first issue of her partially AI-generated graphic novel, Zarya of the Dawn, may be canceled, right? So in September, the registration was issued, and then they walked it back. So also, I think very relevant in sort of the realm of generated works that even though there were early, hints that perhaps copywriting might be applicable, I think that those early hints are sort of pointing the other way now. Which, I mean, again, thinking of commercial uses, if you can't copyright something, right, if you don't own the IP to the work that you have generated, then I think there are also other ways of handling that than just IP law, and I think there's other ways of thinking about it, but that's what we got currently, right? Brett says, I think that's a bad call. Oh, to rescind the copyright? Maybe. I mean, if you build a kaleidoscope, do you own the copyright to all of the images that the kaleidoscope produces? That's maybe a weird example. Alexi says there's a movement of artists, quote, against AI going on right now. Well, I mean, I think they've made some very good points, right? I shared that video last time. Point number one, stability AI did not train a music model on, music they just scraped from wherever because they knew that the record companies would sue them. But they did train a model based on art, just scraped from the internet because they didn't think that the individual artists would sue them, right? So Stability has themselves been like, oh, hey, it's clear that we should have respect to IP and copyright when it'll get us in trouble, which does feel very hypocritical. And also, right, the main use of these image the main commercial use that people are talking about of these image generating systems is to produce art, right? And you wouldn't be able to get images that looked like art without training your system on art. And it was scraped, without artists' consent or knowledge, and is being used, generated works are being used in place of hiring an artist. I get it. I get why they're upset. And I do think that the sort of snotty attitude from the Stability and, unstable diffusion folks is not helping matters, right? Yep. Brett says the main character would have to be trained on their own data to keep the face consistent. The layout would be human. Yeah. I think they scar from AI art. I don't know what you mean there. Tom says Bison is a parser generator used to add GPL licenses to its output. So my understanding, I'm not a lawyer, talk to a lawyer, is that for short pieces of information, you cannot copyright the short pieces of information. So it's sort of questionable whether or not you can copyright a tweet, but you can copyright the organization of those pieces of information, and a parse tree is a type of organization, right? So you can't copyright the content of a database, but you can copyright the organization of a database. And this is my understanding as it's been explained to me by lawyers at some point in the past. So yeah, I think it's well within their rights to do that. Also, GPL as a license is particularly intended as sort of a, I'm trying to come up with a way to say up yours that isn't up yours, and I can't do it. Specifically, it's designed as kind of an up yours to big tech companies who were. It's weird that like Microsoft is like kind of a champion of open source these days, because in the past they were not, and the license was sort of created in that milieu to keep them from using open source work. Yeah, it allows reuse, but it has like specific qualities though. Brett says, I compare the stable diffusion argument to photographers complaining about Photoshop. My question for you is, could Stable Diffusion have been trained without the use of artists' labor? And the answer is no, not in its current form, right? So Photoshop could exist without the exploitation of photographers' labor. Did it make it easier for other people to, you know, edit photographs? Yeah, of course. Do photographers use Photoshop? Yeah, of course. But I think in the case of things like Stable Diffusion in particular, artists' work was taken without their consent or knowledge and used to train commercial products that directly infringe on, you know, that make it harder for them to do their work and could not have been created in the first place without their labor, right? And there's been a very similar discussion going on in particularly fan fiction communities, right? There are commercial products that were built using fan fiction text. Again, fan fiction is different because you don't own the rights to the characters, which actually makes it a little bit worse that they are using it in a commercial setting, but were used to create a commercial product without any, you know, any giving back, right? It feels very much like, I think people sort of feel like how you feel when you've got a sandwich and like, oh, I'm gonna eat my sandwich, and a seagull comes and steals your sandwich. And like, yeah, you're outside, there's seagulls, but you don't expect it to happen, right? And it wasn't your intention when you got a sandwich for yourself to enjoy, maybe with a friend, that a seagull would steal it and use it for seagull purposes, right? I get it. I get why people are upset. And also, people are being super crappy to artists, like crappier than normal. Ugh. So, yeah, Alexi says, I think the ArtStation main page consists of a mixture of likely AI-generated images and anti-AI images. Yeah, I mean, people are playing with it. Microsoft says, Tom says, there's an anyone but Microsoft license. Yeah, it does not surprise me. Brett says, derivative works in art is a copyright exemption. Yeah, there's derivative and there's transformative, right? And I'm not an IP lawyer, so I'm gonna move on from the discussion now. But I think that if there is a group of people upon whom your work absolutely relies and derives value from, and you refuse to acknowledge or interact with them in a meaningful way, regardless of the legality, that feels crappy. It feels like a bad thing to do. It feels cruel and it feels exploitative, right? It's, you know, it's colonizer behavior, and I certainly don't like it. And I'm not even the person it's being done to, right? So, yeah. Brett says, I see that's why Stable Diffusion is removing a lot of artist models from the default model, and users have to train them on models of copyrighted works. Yeah, I mean, Stable Diffusion's like I said, I can sometimes be a little bit acerbic, but it has not escaped my notice that the stability folks have suddenly cared about legality in proportion to the amount of money they have to lose. And when they didn't have any money, they didn't give a crap. And what they really wanted was attention so they could get funding. And that, again, it feels very extractive, it feels very exploitative, and it feels like it's creating distrust to the wider machine learning community outside of the community. And honestly, I think it's justified, right? Just like OpenAI saying, we'll never release this model, it's too dangerous. Oh, no one's paying attention to us anymore. We're gonna release this model. It's so powerful, right? If I can't trust you when you say things, and I can't trust you to act in a way that most people find more or less okay, what can I trust you to do? I can trust you to do things people don't like, and, you know, people are going to take that. They're going to use it as a way to look at, they're going to take that lens, they're going to use it to look at the whole industry, and we're all going to suffer because of it, and I don't know what I can do about it. Alexi says seagull purposes, yes. Brett says, yeah, money make attention, yep. Yep. Anyway, let's talk about politics. So specifically court cases and legislation. And this one I think is actually kind of on lack of education. So this is from, or lack of legislation. So this is from Politico, and it was published March 16th, 2021 by Melissa Hakula, the one who we just talked about with the Lensa stuff. And basically it's just talking about the fact that race is, so it's a protected characteristic in the United States. It's something we talk a lot about on the channel. I'm from the South. It's something I think about a lot. And any vision of, a more just and equitable future has got to include race in its considerations, because it was part of an unjust and inequitable past and present. But this is a discussion of, and I'll just post the link in the chat, we don't have to necessarily read it, about the issues of EU's AI legislation not necessarily considering race in terms of its legal protection framework. So, and I don't know, so this was about the AI rules that were shared in the spring of 2021. I'm not entirely sure if there has been some change recently. However, given that I believe Melissa reshared this article recently, I'm guessing kind of not. And also it plays into the Lensa issue, right? This is something that is disproportionately harming people of color, and disproportionately harming women, and that's an issue. So, Brett says, politics, a not so controversial subject, indeed. But it's all together, right? And it's like, it's coming, right? Legislation around AI is absolutely 100% coming. The court cases are already here. It's going to affect our day-to-day lives as technologists working in the space. So we should know about it and, hopefully help steer it as much as possible by reaching out to our representatives, assuming you live in a place where you have representatives. And so one thing that we've talked about quite a bit on the channel is disinformation, and also adversarial users and malicious users. And I would even stick that in that bucket. So this is from MIT Technology Review. It's from April 27th, 2022. I just happened to hear about it for the first time this week, so I thought I would share it. And it's by Tate, Ryan Mosley, and Sam Richards. And it is about the Minneapolis Police Department, and they used fake social media profiles specifically to surveil Black people. Quote, an alarming report outlines an extensive pattern of racial discrimination within the city's police department. Excuse me. And if you know anything about the history of policing in the United States, that will not be a surprise to you if you are unfamiliar with it. The police forces that exist in the United States owes a lot to, runaway slave patrols. Yep. Anyway, the point that I want to talk about here is, we've talked quite a bit about social media and, malicious users and impersonation. And this is an example of impersonation by a government agency for the purpose of targeting activists under their purview, I guess, around them in their area. Local activists in your area. Activists in my city, it's more likely than you think. And in particular, the protesters here were protesting police brutality. So perhaps, of course, the police would not be super delighted to have people telling them that when they hurt people, people don't like it. But, yep. In addition, quote, the Minneapolis Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of discriminatory race-based policing. Investigators reviewed roughly 700 hours of body-worn camera footage and nearly 480,000 pages of city and MPD documents. The state's reports relies on statistical analysis that weigh differing outcomes for white and non-white Minneapolitans in similar conditions. So this is what we might call like a counterfactual evidence. Right, so everything else being held the same, and then the one variable being changed. No, not matched, guys. What is it? Counterfactual would be in the case that one thing is the same. So you could be using a counterfactual here as well for the modeling. Matched cases? Oh, I forget what it's called. Anyway, racial disparity in police brutality, which, again, if you're familiar with the policing system in the United States, not going to be a surprise to you. As well as, and that's what I think is most important for us as technologists, the surveillance. So the report describes the department's use of secret social media accounts to monitor Black people. MPD, Minneapolis, yeah, that's the city. Minneapolis Police Department officers used covert or fake social media accounts to surveil and engage Black individuals, Black organizations, and elected officials unrelated to criminal activity without a public safety objective, right? So the big issue here is that this is an organization that has a clear history of bias and discrimination and violence, using social media as a way to surveil activists. So when we talk about, the importance of safety on social media and thinking about bad actors and malicious activity, a great example. Also, so this is from 2021, but I believe that this thing is being considered now, the Eurodac regulation. Let me double check. It's in the news again, right? Let me try and get some dates. But basically, this is the legislation in the EU, excuse me, that would allow for wide-scale surveillance, particularly of migrants. Brett says, sounds like it could be entrapment. Yeah, possibly. Entrapment is when the police cause you to commit a crime you would not have otherwise committed, and then been like, haha, we found you committing crime. Which, I mean, clearly you can see how that's a problem. I don't, maybe you can't see how that's a problem. I would say that's a problem. And the US, justice system tends to agree with that, more or less. It's kind of hard to prove, is my understanding. I'm trying to find it. But anyway, so it's talking about particular, I'm looking at another tab trying to find out specific information on when this will take place or come into effect if it hasn't already. I will apologize. I'm not nearly as up on EU legislation or legislation from places that aren't the US as I am on US legislation, because that's one that I can do something about bothering my Congress people, although I don't have a representative right now. He passed recently. We talked about that. So, very unfortunate. Yes. So I'm going to pull in a related subject. So this is from December 6, 2022. And the reason that this came back up is around the EU AI Act. So I'll post the link to the second one that we talked about. And the issue here is that Eurodac was the legislation to allow for large-scale biometric tracking of migrants and people searching for asylum in the EU. And then here, this is the statement about how that interacts with the AI Act and the key advocacy points here. So this is from privacyinternational.org. Published December 6, 2022, no byline. The EU AI Act must be updated in four main ways to address AI-related harms in the migration context, which is what the Eurodac related to. One, prohibit unacceptable uses of AI systems in the context of migration. Expand the list of high-risk systems used in migration. Ensure the AI Act applies to all high-risk systems in migration, including those in use as part of EU IT systems, and ensure transparency and oversight measures apply. Because I believe that in the AI Act is written, a lot of the protections are for EU citizens and don't extend to migrants. So that's sort of what's going on there. And the issue here is, quote, in its original proposal, the EU AI Act does not adequately address to prevent the harms stemming from the use of AI in the migration context. While states and institutions often promote AI in terms of benefits for wider society, for marginalized communities and people on the move, namely migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees, AI technologies fit into a wider system of over-surveillance, criminalization, structural discrimination, and violence. Again, against these folks who are more vulnerable than average, I guess, and as much as there is an average degree of vulnerability. So that's the current ask, and if you are in the EU, perhaps reach out to your representatives and do something about this. If you're in the US, I got an action item for you. So the reason that we're talking about this is from November 28th, 2022. It may come up for a vote, and this is the Kids Online Safety Act. And the big issues with this act are that it requires age verification, and there's been some discussion. I haven't read the most recent draft, but I've heard people discussing that it may require government-issued ID, which clearly is going to would be a vector for increased surveillance, and also may limit children's access to topics around, example, LGBTQ issues, right? So issue there, and particularly online digital rights organizations, privacy organizations, the ACLU, LGBTQ advocacy organizations have all rallied against this act, which could be potentially very harmful. So this is from CNPC, published November 28th, 2022, by Lauren Feiner. Dozens of civil society groups urged lawmakers in a letter Monday against passing a bill that aims to protect children from online harm, which I think is definitely a goal that we all have. I do not think that the bill as written is going to help with that goal. Some of the organizations, the ACLU, the Center for Democracy and Technology, we talk about them quite a lot, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Fight for the Future, GLAAD, and the Wikimedia Foundation, so a bunch of names in the space that, if you watch my channel a lot, you're probably familiar with, were among more than 90 groups that wrote to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Senate Commerce Committee Chair Maria Cantwell, and Ranking Member Roger Wicker, opposing the Kids Online Safety Act. So if you're looking for who to reach out for and you're in the US, those would be the folks. The bill would require sites to default to more private settings for users 16 and younger and limit the contacts that could connect to them. It would require tools for parents to track the time their kids are spending on certain sites and give them access to some information about the kids' use of the platform so the parents could address potential harm. Sites would have to let young users know that parental tools are in effect. The civil society group that signed Monday's letter, which includes several groups that advocate for the rights of the LGBTQ community, warned that the tools the bill creates to protect children could actually backfire. Quote, COSA would require online services to, quote, prevent a set of harms against minors, which is effectively an instruction to employ broad content filtering to limit minors' access to certain online content. The group wrote, adding that the content filters used by school in response to earlier legislation, I believe that would be COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, maybe, have limited resources for sex education and for LGBTQ youth. And again, if you're familiar with the American political context, in particular, trans children and adults have been the focus of a lot of discriminatory legislation recently. Online services, again reading from the letter, would face substantial pressure to over-moderate, including from state attorneys general seeking to make political points about what kind of information is appropriate for young people, they added. At a time when books with LGBTQ plus themes are being banned from school libraries and people providing health care to trans children are being falsely accused of, quote, grooming, COSA would cut off another valuable avenue of access to information for vulnerable youth. And particularly, the reporting to parents, so for queer kids who are closeted and are maybe trying to seek information and learn about themselves and their community and how to be safe and healthy, having that information restricted would be a clear avenue for harm. So and of course they bring up the issues of abusive situations. There's a long history of various forms of violence against queer children in particular, even by their families here in the US. And, you know, it's an issue. Yep. Another thing that I am, particularly concerned about with this is that age verification may require users to provide platforms with personally identifiable information, such as date of birth and government-issued ID documents, which can threaten users' privacy, including through the risk of data breaches or, just straight up the data being sold, and chill their willingness to access sensitive information online because they cannot do so anonymously. So overall, very increases the amount of surveillance done particularly against children online, and would allow individual states to censor information that is relevant to particularly queer kids. So not great. If you're in the US, I would recommend reaching out to your senators and representatives, and then particularly Schumer, Cantwell, and Wicker, especially if you're their constituent. Shoot. Also, outside of the US context, so if you're not familiar, there is a civil war going on in Ethiopia. I've sort of referred to it kind of obliquely on the channel a couple of times. And as in a lot of violent conflicts around the world, Facebook has both enabled and, potentially magnified? I think magnified is the word I'm looking for. Made bigger. Partisanized? Radicalized? I don't know that there's been a ton of research specifically on this particular conflict, but in Kenya, the son of a man who was killed after, posts targeting him specifically and including personal information so that people could find him, is suing Meta for their lack of their role in helping that happen. Meta says it invested heavily in moderation and tech to remove hate. That's nice. That's cool. I'm glad they're doing that. I would argue that they're not doing enough. A representative said hate speech and incitement to violence were against the platform rules, and yet the platform hosts them. If you do not enforce your rules unilaterally, what good are they? So, but anyway, ongoing, the case was filed in Kenya's High Court because there's a content moderation team in Kenya, I believe. Yes, Meta has a content moderation hub in the Kenyan capital of Nairobi. Another court case to keep an eye on. All right, let's end with some fun. I'm kind of getting close to time, but let's end on a little bit of a high note because we've talked about some really heavy stuff. So first off, hat tip to rest of the world here for sharing this, but this is a repository of sounds from around the world that are, shared. Cities in Memory features more than 3,000 sounds from across more than 90 countries, with everything from remote recordings of the natural world to our busiest urban centers. There's an entire world of sounds to explore on our global sound map. Lexi says fun. Yeah, it is fun. Yes, you can see where they've got recordings from, the US, a lot in Europe. I believe the project is based in Europe. Some in South America, some in Africa, Oceania, Asia. There's some in Hawaii. So, yeah. Brett says moderation in that part of the world is underpaid, overworked, and have issues with toxic environments. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a bigger problem with moderation generally. And this is something I've been thinking about, right? I like small communities, I like purpose-built tools, and I think that the smaller your community and the more that the moderators are part of that community, the better it can be. I think large general purpose platforms have this as an intrinsic problem. It is not solved, and honestly, platforms aren't motivated to solve it because it's not going to make them money. And in fact, arguably more moderation makes them less money because they're removing posts in the short term, right? In the long term, it means people are not going to want to use their platform. Well, I guess if they've successfully radicalized people, then they're going to continue to come back for their, radicalizing content. So small, purpose-built social communities, that's my preference. So Alexi says, I was making different ambient recordings when I've been to Hong Kong and Germany. Yeah, I enjoy ambient recordings myself. So if you're interested in, here and around the world, some cool things to check out. Did I post the link? I did. Yeah, I would definitely check it out. Alexi says, it's interesting how the architecture changes the reverberation of the sounds. Yeah, absolutely. Everything from, what is the road made of to, what are the general shapes of the eaves to are there eaves? Yeah. So cool thing to click around on. We talked about this, something similar last week, but the trend continues. We love to see it. This is from the Daily Mail, published December 12th, 2022, by Miriam Quepper, Quepper, and Cambridge University is giving some stolen stuff back to the original owners in Uganda. Exciting. We love to see it. A lot of, very beautiful treasures and objects that are being returned to, quote, their cultural homes. So we love to see stolen stuff going back to the people who it was stolen from, and really delightful to see repatriation of these objects as a broader trend across the museum community. 10 out of 10. Alexi says the recordings were quadraphonic. Oh, fancy. Should make some more. Yeah. High-rise buildings versus small red roofs in terms of how it's affecting the sound. Yeah. And then finally, my favorite, your favorite, now I'm deciding for you. It's the Pudding Cup. So the Pudding is a online news source, I guess, that does data journalism that is visualization drawn. Some of the most beautiful work that I have seen in the data visualization space. And every year they have a pudding cup. A pudding cup is also, if you're not familiar with sort of American foodways, you can buy pudding in a little plastic container. Pudding is like a sweet custard. If you don't know what custard is, you're not gonna know what pudding is. Anyway, it's a dessert, and it comes in a cup. So the pudding cup, a cup like an award, but also pudding cup anyway. It's a good pun. I hope that if you did not get it the first time, I explained it sufficiently. And here are the top 3 winners. So the first is all the ways to make bubble tea, which has a there are 12 million possible combinations, so we can all make a bubble tea together. Pick your base drink: pure tea, milk-based drink, fruit-based drink, fresh juice, and probiotics. I'm a milk tea fan when I get a bubble tea. All right, and then you can see it creates this really nice sort of waterfall diagram of the different types of tea: black tea, green tea, oolong tea, barley tea, whether you add coffee, ginger tea, other teas, what sort of milks you use, what sort of flavors, what sort of little chewy bits you have in there, pudding, taro balls, rice grains, boba, etc. And then you get all these different cool drinks, right? Tasty. Hopefully the food content warning would have been noticeable from the fact that I said bubble tea. Yeah, really beautiful visualization, fully interactive, very performant as well for the amount of information. And then this, which is a really beautiful visualization. So it's looking at let's open it in a new tab. The project is Flags of Inequality. I'll post a link to this as well. Well, I posted the top link, y'all can click through. If countries had equal rights for their LGBTQ plus citizens, then this visualization would not exist. We make use of the rainbow flag to portray to what extent different dimensions of queer life are disregarded by state regulations. Right, so here you have the pride flag, which is the rainbow flag. It has 6 colors. Each segment has the same width and height. We match these categories to the we match these to the categories the ILGA assesses in its report. Purple represents asylum, blue represents civil society space, green represents legal gender recognition and intersex bodily integrity, yellow represents hate crimes and hate speech protection, orange covers recognition of LGBTQ plus families, and red represents equality and non-discrimination. And then what they have is a bunch of visualizations for different countries about the degree to which each of those rights are protected in each of those countries, right? So Malta is the best overall. Most of the stripes are kind of most of the way. You can also look at it through time, so you can see, you know, the difference between 2015 and 2022, and you may notice that protections are actually lessening in a lot of places. Rachel, that's bad. Yes. Yes, there's a reason I talk about it on the channel. And you can see, you know, a rank of different countries. For example, Russia is, and I believe this is mostly focusing on the countries in the report, which it seems like is mostly focused on Europe. But as you can see, Russia is quite far down the list, as is Turkey, whereas, you know, Malta and Denmark are quite close to the top. Yeah. Here's the Russian flag for you, Alexi. From 2015 to 2022. It got less bad than some other ones. So there was, looks like in 2018, there was an increase in legal gender recognition and intersex bodily integrity. So, yep, very good, impactful visualization. I really like that it sort of shows, you know, how far we have to go. Alexi says, oh shit, yeah. Yep. And then the third one is an explainer for k-means. Oh, I should say the authors. So for the bubble tea one, it was by Julia Janicki and Daisy Chung. For the flags of inequality, it was by Rita Costa and Beatrice Malviero. And for the k-means clustering, it's by Yi Zhiang. I'm sure some of those sounds were wrong, and I'm just gonna power through. Alexi says, so different with pre-2014 Russia. But, oh, it's reactive. Can you see my mouse? One sec. You can't see my mouse. Those are not moving randomly. When I mouse over, they pop up underneath it. Isn't it? That's very fun. You should definitely check this out. Like I said, I really enjoy the pudding cup. I love a good data visualization story. Love some good data reporting. Anyway, and it's just like an interactive visualization of how k-means work, which I'm sure most of you know. Yeah, so definitely check those out. And then there's a bunch of honorable mentions as well, but I have to wrap it up for my next thing, Rachel. Don't go over. That's me and myself. Yeah, so definitely check these out. If you are a monthly subscriber, thank you. Oh, has that been there the whole time? No. Hold, please. No. Hold. There we go. No, okay, good. So I switched my thank you screen and I realized I hadn't actually moved it so that you didn't see the wall behind me and everything was covered by the green screen. Whoopsie. Thank you for supporting me. I appreciate you very much. Like I mentioned, my supporters are mostly covering my bills from the business, which is nice. I very much appreciate it. And also everybody at the all the links please level and above. I'll pop it up so you can see what I'm talking about. You've already gotten the links. I sent them out early today. I'm very proud of myself. Good job, Rachel. So you have them to check out. I also did a lot of bonus links this week in particular. So there's a lot more stuff that I didn't talk about on stream that are included in the bonus links, and you also check those out if you're a member. Otherwise, so it's this middle tier, all the links please, gets all the links to the research papers, which is the annotated bibliography, as well as everything that we talk about during class. And Chit Chat Club folks, check the page. It should already be up and you should have gotten your invitation. And I believe it is this Friday, but I'm going to double check right now really quick while I'm thinking about it. So Chit Chat Club members, I'll see you on Friday. Yeah, it's tomorrow. So I will talk to you then. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. Oh, Alexi says, in 2014, I remember seeing lesbian singers to Eurovision was considered controversial in Europe, but quite okay in Russia. Was that Tattoo? Was Tattoo in Eurovision? One second. Oh, they were in Eurovision in 2003 and 2009. My knowledge of queer music in Russia kind of starts and ends with that group. Well, it's Pussy Riot. I know I don't know off the top of my head that they are explicitly queer, but anyway. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Docking. Just say that. Thank you to all my supporters. I'll see y'all on Friday if you're in the Chit Chat Club. And thank you for joining. I have to go grade now. First, I'm gonna take a little nap. Then I'm gonna go grade. No, I have to do my thing first. First, I'm gonna do my thing. Then I'm gonna have lunch and a little nap, and then I'm gonna grade. I'm gonna get through it. I'm just gonna power through. Yeah, so I will be back next Tuesday, and then is that going to be, yes, so I will be back next Tuesday, and then I'm taking a break. There will be no streams until probably the 3rd. I'll be back, and I'll post about this on YouTube and Coffee as well, so that it's not a surprise, but I'm taking a little holiday break because I am tired. So I will talk to you all on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll talk to you soon.